Come with me as I make a pattern mashup of the Children's Corner Carol and Taylor patterns. For this mashup, you're going to need your main fabric, an accent fabric, your collar fabric, and a lining fabric. Now on to the mashing part. So I have outlined the Carol pattern and the Taylor pattern together on a new piece of tissue. In this mashup, you'll see that I used the arm side, the shoulder, the neck, and the length from Carol. Then I overlaid the pattern for Taylor and came from the arm side down to the leg casing and then outlined the crotch and the overall bottom of the crotch. Make sure your overall length from the top of your neck to the bottom of the crotch is going to match up with the overall length for the Taylor finished pattern. Those links are always on the back of their patterns. If you need to make any adjustments based on your child's measurement, follow the lines that are on the patterns where, especially the Taylor pattern, where there's a cut line where you can adjust the overall length. In the pattern front, you'll notice I cut out a view C, but you can also use this for the same thing for view A and B as well. This little outfit I'm making now is going to be a view A. So we will just fold the extra material that would have been for the smocked version back. And then that way we'll cut it on a fold. And once we've got it all embellished, you will want to cut out a block and embellish first and then cut out the actual pattern. That way if your embroidery causes your fabric to draw up, then you can cut your pattern out afterwards. So next we're going to go in and we're going to do sort of the same thing for the pattern back. Again, you'll use your arm side, your shoulder, and your neck, and your overall length from the Carol pattern. Then you will come in from your arm side down to the leg casing and down around to the crotch. Once you've got those done, before you cut it out, make sure that the overall lengths at the side seams are the same. And as long as they're the same, everything should work out. You're going to cut this on the fold as well. You're going to cut one lining fabric and one main fabric. You'll also cut one lining and one main from the pattern front as well. On this back piece, before you cut it, be sure to mark a slit down the back. I used an 8-inch slit for this size 18 month, but you're going to need to kind of judge that based on the size of your child. And I used the dimension from the Children's Corner Jamie pattern for the actual placket that we're going to be making, because this will need a placket. And the placket piece that you're going to cut will be 2 1/4 inches wide, and then the length needs to at least be 17 inches long, but I like to make mine a couple of inches longer. That way I have any extra material I may need to create a fold and to make it neat. So I usually cut it somewhere around 18 to 19 inches long. Now's the time to do any embellishment that you're going to do to your front piece block. You'll also cut out all of your other pieces. Now that all your pattern pieces are cut out, we're going to stitch together the shoulder seams at both the lining and the main fabrics. You're going to want to put right sides together and then just stitch those top corners, making sure that they're lined up appropriately. Once you've got them stitched, you'll need to press those open. That way they lay flat. Here they are, stitched and pressed. My next step, I slit my back pattern piece down to the dot that we marked when we drafted the pattern piece. We're going to do the same slit down to the dot on the lining. Next, we're going to go ahead and attach this collar ruffle. If you're following the Carol pattern collar instructions, you will basically follow those pretty much exactly as they're written. And if you are not doing a collar at all, you can follow the Taylor pattern instructions. I chose to do the collar ruffle that is shown on the Children's Corner blog. They have wonderful tutorials on their blog for all different types of pattern modifications. And I just think this little ruffle is just very, very sweet. So what we're going to do is I have a couple of pattern marks that I have made. I've made a 1/4 inch seam line mark so I know how far over I'm going to sew my placket. And then 1/8 of an inch away from that, I've got a mark. That's where I want to stop my ruffle. On this other side, I've got the same 1/4 inch placket mark where the stitching line will be. And then there's a 1/2 inch mark, excuse my double marks. There's a 1/2 inch mark where once the placket is folded back, this is where that placket will end. I want to come over another 1/8 of an inch away from that so that my collars are not caught up in my placket. So now I have my collar ruffle pinned on. I'm going to go to the machine and just baste it in place just inside the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Before I do that, I do want to make sure that my gathers are equally distributed. I may need to adjust some of these because they look like they've gotten a little bit bunched up as I was pinning the collar to the main fabric. Once I get this basted on, I can remove my pins and make sure I like it before I proceed, because once it's there, it is there. So now is the next stage where I differed greatly from the pattern, from the Carol pattern. I like to make my sleeves sewn in flat. I don't like to do set-in sleeves. I struggle with those. And so what we'll do next, we're going to go ahead and do the gathering threads at the top and at the bottom, and then prepare our sleeve band that we're going to use. If you're doing the straight sleeve and not the puffed sleeve, you would just make that cuff sleeve like normal. This is for a little girl's outfit, so it's a puffed sleeve. And so I'll go ahead and get the gathering threads sewn. I've got my pattern pieces marked. One thing to note about the Carol pattern is it is a definite back and front. You need to be sure to mark which is which. Because if you get it in backwards, you can sew it in backwards, but it's going to look weird. Okay, so now I have my sleeve to where it is stretched out enough to meet the bias band, and I've done a figure 8 to lock my gathering threads around these pins temporarily until I get my bias band pinned to the sleeve. I'll take it over to the machine, we'll stitch that down, baste that down, and then make sure the gathers are where I want them, and then we'll make the same adjustments to the other sleeve. Okay, so now I have my bias band pinned to the bottom of my sleeves. I'm going to go ahead and stitch those in place. This portion, we're still going to use the 1/4 inch seam allowance, but even though it's flat right now, we're not going to join the sleeves together just yet. That's going to be done in a different step. Okay, now that we have both sleeves with the armbands on, we're going to gather the sleeve cap and match it up to the arm side of the bodice and front and back pieces. Now, one thing that's going to be extremely important, because this is a lined bubble, we're going to stop our stitching about 1.5 to 2 inches away from the end, because we'll complete that in a different step. But for right now, stop about 1.5 to 2 inches in. So there are 2 ways you can finish this bubble. I choose to do the lined method because I don't like the exposed seams, but you could also follow along with the Carol pattern and do a bias band around the neckband, and then just a zigzag or overlock stitch on the sleeve, and then you would have to do a bias casing for the legs. That would be great if you had very thick material or heavy material, but as you can kind of see through here, this Fabric Finder's fabric is actually a little bit thin. It's just a light color. It's 100% cotton, and so I chose to line it because it's just a little too see-through for my liking. Okay, so mark your center of your sleeve cap. We marked it when we cut our pattern pieces out, but mark the center of that. Pay very close attention to the front and the back pieces of this pattern. So I use a paper clip on my front portion pointing towards the front. I also have my marks with the friction pin that I use, but just in case it gets wiped away when I go to press everything, I also mark it with a safety pin. So what we're going to do is we're going to gather from the corner of this sleeve. We're going to match it right sides together to the corner of the fabric, pin it, come up about 2 more inches, pin it again, same thing on the other side, and then we're also going to match this center mark to, and it may be hard to see in this fabric, but to the seam that's at the shoulder. Okay, so now I have my sleeve pinned in place. I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a basting stitch just to kind of baste it in place. I'll remove the pins, flip that sleeve out, and make sure I like how the gathers are done, and then I'll do a final stitching to stitch it in place. Okay, so remember what I said about not stitching that first 1.5 to 2 inches. Be sure you leave that open. I just stitched it up and had to pick those stitches out. So now I'm going to go in and baste this in place, but be sure to leave that first section and the last section open. You will want to do a couple of back stitches to tack the stitches down at the front and the back, but for right now, just make sure you go ahead and get those basted in. Okay, so now at this point I have the sleeves are in place. I left this first 1.5 to 2 inches ish from the edge of the armscye and sleeve open. Looks a little weird, but I promise we'll fix it in just a minute. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break and I'm going to go in. I'm going to try to press this a little bit. We can, now that we've got the sleeves in place, we can take our pins out. I'll take out all of the gathering stitches that are exposed, and just do a little bit of cleanup so that when we move on to the next steps, we've already got kind of a clean canvas to work from. So now it is time to attach our lining. So what I'm going to do is over here where my sleeve is, we're going to kind of tuck it back, fold it back just a little bit to get to where we can see that seam line that we just stitched. We want to kind of keep this right here as straight as we can, and then we're going to start from this portion here where we partially attach the sleeve. We're going to do the same thing with the lining fabric, and so we'll just go ahead and start from here, continue all the way up around to the other side, and we will do the same thing on this other side. So this particular view that I'm making is going to have this collar, and instead of it being sandwiched between the lining, it actually has a bias neckband that's a contrast as well. So we're not going to attach the lining to this neckband. That is on purpose. There is another way that you can, if you're doing either a plain with no collar or no ruffle, there is a way where you can use the burrito method to sandwich this in together so that you don't have exposed seams right here. But for this view, we're not going to attach the lining to the neck. Okay, so I've got all of this sleeve sandwiched in between the main, which is on the bottom side, and my lining fabric, which is on the top, right sides to right sides of the main bodice. And so I'm going to run through 1/4 inch seam, stitch this in place, making sure that I don't grab the very end of this piece, because that'll come together in just a minute. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and run this through. I do like to make sure I stitch one side at a time. I'm not going to go ahead and pin the other side until after I get this one stitched in place, just to make sure I don't jab myself with extra pins. Okay, so I've got that first set of stitches run through on here. I've turned the lining right side out. So there's the sleeve portion, but this is like you're looking at the inside of the garment, and that hides the seam here, so you won't see any raw edges there as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is do the other side that's over here. Here's the thing, you've got to use the burrito method on the second side, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to turn it back out. So Children's Corner, their website, has a tutorial on the burrito method. I believe Miss Lizette Thomas also has a video on YouTube that is incredibly helpful. Learning how to do this technique, it seems a little confusing to me at first, but once I got the hang of it, it is super simple, and it really does make for a nice way to finish off the garment. Okay, so now that our sleeves have been encased in the lining, you don't see any raw edges. We do still have the lining material, the front bodice material, and somewhere in here, there it is the sleeve. Those 3 pieces are still loose. That's on purpose. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Okay, so the next step, we have got to put our placket in. And what I do here is I treat this piece of lining and bodice back as one piece of fabric. So I'm going to go in with a basting stitch and just run a real quick line down a stitch across. You need to put at least 1 stitch across here at the bottom, possibly 2, depends on how wide your stitch length is, and then come back up. You're not doing anything with the neckline yet. We're just going to seal this slit up. We want to treat this as one piece of fabric. Okay, so now I have my placket pinned in place. It is right side to right side. That way, once we fold back and whip over to the inside and whip it down, you won't be able to see any of the raw edges. So there's lots of information on Children's Corner's website. I do believe Children's Corner has a video on a continuous bound placket. The Jamie pattern also has continuous bound placket instructions as well. I know that pattern is out of print currently, but if you have it, there is a page in the instructions there that kind of give you details on how to do a continuous bound placket, because that is used on the Bishop version of the Jamie bubble. So now I'm just going to go ahead and stitch my placket in place. You'll notice I have a lot of material left at the end, but that was kind of on purpose because I want to make sure I'm not shortchanging myself and don't want to have to stitch it and unstitch it and, you know, run the risk of being short material. I have my little V temporarily pinned down. Once I get to stitching, I will undo these pins. That way I can just grab the little bite of fabric that is right there at where that junction comes together. That particular spot, I don't want a pleat there, and if you're not careful, you will wind up with a pleat there. So I'm going to go ahead and get that stitched down, and then we can move on to the next part. Okay, so my placket has been sewn and attached. I have pressed it towards the seam allowance towards the placket, and then folded it over, and where I had already pre-pressed a 1/4 inch seam allowance to the back, you can do one of two things. You could either whip stitch this section down, or you can do stitch in the ditch, and just kind of go right along that stitching line to catch this seam allowance back here. When I went through and pinned this, I tried to make sure that this would always catch on that piece of fabric that's on the back of the placket. Okay, so now the placket is complete. I have gone in, and on the right hand side, I've gone in and tacked down the placket side to the back side of the piece. That way it can cross over to, the buttons will be on this side, the buttonholes will be on this side. So I've got it temporarily tacked at the top so that when I put my neckband on, it won't get all wonky. Okay, the time has come to go in and put together the sleeve end and the main fabric side seams. The lining is still loose at this point, but we're just gonna stitch this long part, or the short part, I'm sorry, of the sleeve. That way we can get ready for the next part. We'll do that on both sides. Okay, so now I've got my side seam and my sleeve put together, and I went and I pressed those seams open. You still have the gap right there in between, but next we're going to take our lining and dig around there and find it. And we're going to also sew the side seams of that lining side up. So one thing to be careful about when you do the side seam of the lining is to make sure you are sewing right sides to right sides of the lining. If you don't, you're going to wind up with a visible seam, and that defeats the whole purpose of lining it. Okay, so now I have the side seam of the main, the side seam of the lining, and the seam of the sleeve all completed. The main and the lining are just flat seams that have been pressed open. The sleeve is a teeny tiny, it's hard to see, sorry about that, just a teeny tiny French seam. Now we're going to stitch across this hole, and we're going to make a sandwich. We're going to do the sleeve sandwiched between the lining and the main pieces, and then we'll double stitch over that and trim the seam, and then turn it back out and press it. Be careful when you make your French seam, though, that you have not exceeded the 1/4 inch seam allowance, because if you do, then your sleeve is not going to line up exactly with the side seams. All right, so our lining sandwich has been made. Lining and main and the sleeve are all squished together, stitched over. I have done the seam twice and then trimmed the seam down just to reduce the bulk, especially right here in this seam. So we can turn this out now. And you'll see that that seam is all complete. We'll take it over to the ironing board and press it, and then I'll show you the inside of the garment. Okay, so now all of the top of the dress, for the sleeves anyway, has been encased and bound into the side, or into the lining seams, so there's no raw edges that will make the baby's skin scratchy or rough. And so the only thing I have left to do on the sleeve is to tack down and whip stitch down the collar, but I saved that until my very last step. And then now we've got to do the neck binding. For this one, we're going to follow the Children's Corner blog post on how to add a ruffle. I believe it was to the Lee pattern, but it will work for this one as well. We've already attached the ruffle, but now we just need to bind the neck. And then after that, we can move on to the leg casings. Okay, now my neckband is pinned in place. I'll take it to the machine, baste it in place, make sure my gathers are where they need to be, make sure everything's like I want it. And then we can take it to the machine, press the seam allowance towards the, after it's stitched, we'll pull the band over and then wrap the seam allowance. Okay, so we are coming down the home stretch. The neckband has been stitched into place. That way it's basically complete. The only thing I've got left to do for the top is the buttonholes, but I'm going to do those last. And then now we're going to move over to the sleeves, and I'm going to whip stitch those in place. I like to try to get the whole top portion finished before I do the legs. That way, if something's wrong, I can have access to the seams to unpick and redo. But we're going to have to be very careful when we make our burrito that we don't catch any of the remainder of the fabric. But it is basically the same thing. We'll turn it. So that you're looking at the side seam, right side out of the main fabric. Goes all the way over to the crotch in the back, and then to the crotch in the front. And so you can take from the top, you can kind of roll up your burrito stuffing, pick up just the lining, or I'm sorry, just the main fabric, push it up. This is hard to do one-handed. Flip it over, bring that same, just the lining piece, kind of smush your taco stuffing up in there. And then this is the seam for the lining. Match up those seams and pin the whole thing, making sure none of the dress is or bubble is caught in the seam. The leg has been stitched from front crotch to the back crotch. I've pressed the seam, and we'll need to turn it out from inside out to be able to do the final press of that seam. All right, so this next step is really why I don't do a whole lot of pressing other than just at the seams, because you see how wadded up this is. There's a lot of steps of turning it inside out, and I will give it one good final press now that this is almost done. We do have one more inside out seam to make, but I want to go ahead and get it straightened out before we go to the next seam. Okay, so the leg casings are next. I've marked with pins where the casing is going to start and stop. And I've also gone in, marked where I want to start my seam allowance. I'm going to stitch following the pattern for Taylor for the girls garment. And so I just put a little visual tick mark in there so I can see. You'll also use the elastic measurement from the Taylor pattern in this bottom portion as well. Okay, so now I have my elastic inserted into the leg casings that we made. And so the only thing left to do is to finish the crotch seams. So how I'm going to do this is I am going to pull the front main and lining through the back, and with it being inside out, I'm going to stitch this seam. So you just reach all the way through, going through the side of the leg. It's hard to do one-handed. And you'll grab both of those pieces of fabric from the front, and pull it through. You'll neaten it up, straighten out that seam, and stitch it. Okay, so I've got this front seam inside out. We're just going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and after I do that, we will pull it out and give it a really good press, and then the back seam we're just going to top stitch folded under. Okay, so the crotch seams are finished. This is the one that I've turned to the inside. This is the front. This is the one we turned to the inside and stitched like a normal seam. And then you can see a little bit on my back piece that I folded under a 1/4 inch seam on the front and the back and did a 1/8 inch, it's actually more like 1/16 of an inch, top stitch just to secure it in place. So now the only thing left to do is to put the snaps in the crotch and to put my buttonholes in, and then we'll be finished. Okay, that's it. It's all done. I've got my buttons on, got the snaps in, so now all it needs is a good final press. I like to use the heat erasable friction pins, and so I need to press to remove my marks. And then after that, I'll give it a good steam and press to kind of remove some of the set-in creases from where we have been turning it in and out. But that's it. The Carol and Taylor